This right here is my Japanese import mini truck that I got for very cheap. Now I say import because these things were brought over from Japan, but this model is particularly special because it is a US spec model. So all the steering and everything is on the correct left-hand side. I've been trying to do a lot of research on these. There's not a whole lot of information. I'm still trying to figure out a year on this thing. From what I narrowed it down to is a 1987 to a 1989. Somewhere along those years. Scoured the internet, tried to find any kind of information on it. I did learn that there was quite a bit of these brought to Florida. There is some that are the exact same model over in Daytona with the left-hand drive Mitsubishi mini trucks with this high top on it. But like I said, there's not too much information on it, so I'm going strictly off of what other people have told me. One other really interesting fact, well, at least I think is interesting, is that this thing used to be a Disney-owned vehicle. You can kind of barely see it, but you can see Disney's Pest Management right here. I live in Florida, so I'm only assuming that this is Disney World. I'm also assuming that they bought this brand new and used it at Disney World until they eventually retired it. I did not buy it from Disney World. I bought it on Marketplace as a non-running, non-driving mini truck. The previous owner told me a little bit about it. He used to take it out to a place called River Ranch. A lot of people go out there to do mudding and four-wheel drive, stuff like that. He said it did great out there, but then it stopped running and it sat for, he said a few months, I'm assuming a little bit longer. Usually when people say it's been sitting for a few months, it's usually a lot longer than that. Hopefully nothing too catastrophic went wrong with it. Things that kind of go out there get abused, so we're hoping this is not the case for that. Quickly going over it, it is not in the best shape, as you may be able to see. This is all surface rust up top here, but there is some parts that actually rust all the way through. This door has been very dinged up, rust spots right here, along with the whole front end being dented in. Front bumper is in very bad shape. I don't think that's fixable. Same thing over here, more rust, lots more rust. It's almost complete. It is missing this rear tailgate thing. These other ones work and function properly. They actually, you flip this up, flip that down, go over here, pull this out, and folds right down. Very cool. This would be a really cool parts getter if we can get it running. It'd be really cool. As you can see, it's lifted up on some mud tires. They look to be in okay shape. A little bit of dry rot, some rusty rims, but they'll do. They'll do for now. Also missing a mirror on this side, and the windshield is cracked. The windshield is a pretty big bummer. I don't know how to get one of those. Maybe have to import it from Japan and bring it back over here. Not too sure. And if you also notice right here, it says four-wheel drive. This is a four-wheel drive model, which is one I have been specifically looking for. I was looking for a cheap one and one that's four-wheel drive, because a two-wheel drive one of these is kind of boring. You want one you can go off-road with. Now looking in the interior, it is not much prettier. The doors are complete at least, but it is very rusty. The seat is pretty much all gone. The floor has a bunch of fiberglass laid over it, so you can only assume there is more holes underneath that. The dash is not very pretty. It needs a new coat of paint. It's all sun-dried. Not in super great shape. Horn works. I believe all the turn signals work and everything. Not too sure about the gauges because we haven't been able to drive it yet. Just pushed it off the trailer. But at least it's complete. It's good news at least. Now let's talk about the major issue with it, and that is it doesn't start. It turns over, but it's not firing. Now, the previous owner thinks it's a fuel pump or something in the fuel lines preventing it from getting fuel. I have noticed a little bit is taken apart in here, so I can only assume that he actually started digging into it. Hopefully he didn't see something that's unfixable. I did try to look up some parts for this, and they are near impossible to find. Everything is in Japan and expensive. I will go ahead and turn it over for you guys so you can see that it actually cranks, but it does not start. It's trying to start. It really wants to, but it's just not getting any fuel. I sprayed some starter fluid down in there and it cranks right up with that, so it definitely know it's some kind of fuel issue. Don't know if it's the fuel pump or something in the fuel lines or what. Not too sure. But I'm excited to start digging into this thing and see if we can figure out what's preventing it from starting. I'm going to start with the fuel pump, look at that, check the wires, check something, make sure it's actually working. I'm going to push it back underneath my carport and start working on it. Hopefully it's an easy fix. It's not usually too easy, but maybe we'll get lucky. We'll see. All right, I figured out some stuff last night. I was just gonna replace the fuel pump, but then I decided I better check the wiring and the fuses and everything, make sure nothing is blown. I found the fuse box. There was not a fuse for the fuel pump, so I had to find the relay. Couldn't find it, and I couldn't find the information online, so I tracked back the wires, ended up finding it, and there was no power to it. No power going to the fuse pump. So what I did is I took a hard wire from the battery and hooked it right up to the fuel pump wire, and it started working. I started hearing it work, and it started pumping out fluid, just not very fast. It might be due to the battery dying. The battery did die last night, but it wasn't really putting out too much gas, right, this gas line. So the next step in all this is to see if it's the relay that's having a problem or if there's no power going to the relay. I can't find a wiring diagram on this, so I'm gonna have to do it all manually. But first thing I'm gonna do is pull it into the garage because it is very hot. It's hot out here. All right, we figured out a lot more stuff. Did some wiring testing and everything like that. It's getting power to it, and it was actually getting power to the fuel pump. I was treating this like an old Volkswagen where if you turn the key on, it immediately gives power to the fuel pump, but it's not the case for this. Whenever you turn it over, that's when it starts giving power to the fuel pump. So we figured that out. It's getting power to the fuel pump. The relay is fine, which is good because that relay was like $100. So we're good there. Everything works in that relay. But that brings us back to the fuel pump issue. It's not pumping out very much fuel. I turn it on and it's barely even coming out. So either there's a clog in the line somewhere, the fuel pump is starting to go bad, or there's a bunch of crap in the fuel tank that's keeping it from pumping. So I think my plan now is to drop the fuel tank and spray out all the lines, clean it all up, and then put it all back together and test out then. That sounds like the next logical step. I don't know how hard it is to drop this fuel tank, but it looks fairly easy. I might also end up replacing a lot of those fuel lines and maybe even go ahead and swap out the fuel pump because it does sound a little rough. So maybe we'll end up swapping that out too. Haven't decided yet. First thing we're gonna do is drop that fuel tank and take a look inside of it. See how bad it is. you see how bad that gas tank was? It's one of the worst I've ever seen. I just know I'm not gonna be able to find a new one, and I think a used one is just as impossible to find, so cleaned it all out. I took a chain and shook it around, got all the loose rust and whatever dirt and mud was in there. It was like caked with mud too, and the inside, not just the outside. Anyway, got it all cleaned up, sprayed out. Ideally, I think I would want to put a coating in there to prevent it from rusting anymore. I just want to get this thing running today, so cleaned it all out, got all the loose stuff out, and then eventually I'm gonna have to drop that tank again because I want to replace the fuel sending unit. That thing was also all rusted, and I'm sure it doesn't work. The gauge doesn't work, so I'm sure that has something to do with it, so I would like to replace that too. Have to find that part somehow. This is the old fuel pump, not much to it. That was a fuel filter. I'm sure it's all clogged up with everything that was in that tank. Still a little bit of gas. The gas was really bad. You can smell how bad it is. What I did is I ended up cutting off the old wires and soldered them onto the new one. That way it plugs back up in the factory, and I also put it in the factory spot. So it should be good to go there, and I tested it and make sure it worked. We're all good. Didn't take much for it to start, just a couple of cranks over and it started, but it was pouring out gas. It wasn't from the fuel line, because that's the fuel line right there. It was pouring out like on that seam right here on the carburetor. I think what I have to do is pull out that carburetor and take it apart, maybe find a new gasket for it or some gasket maker. Not really sure yet, but we're gonna take that out and see if the screws are loose or something, because it was pouring out. You can see that on there, kind of the puddle it made. Definitely want to fix that though before I take it for a test drive. So we're gonna figure out how to pull that carburetor out and get it taken care of. All right, we're figuring out a lot more about this thing, mainly about the carburetor, because I cannot get it to work properly. This carburetor is kind of complicated. It has a lot of lines going to it, some vacuum lines and also some coolant lines. It's a very complicated carburetor for an engine that really doesn't need it to be. I took it apart, I fixed the gas leak that was coming out of it. What I did is I took it apart and I put some gasket maker in there and sealed up the whatever it was leaking out of, and that fixed that issue. The issue after that was I can get it running, but as soon as I give it any kind of gas, it bogs down and dies. So that was telling me that there's something in the carburetor, probably a bunch of junk because of all that stuff that we cleaned up from the gas tank. So I took it back off, took the lower end apart, and I found a bunch of rust and gas and just a bunch of junk in there. I cleaned it out as best I could. It was just kind of rusty. It was a lot of stuff in there. Ideally, this thing really needs a rebuild kit, and when I looked up a rebuild kit on one of these, the one I found was $200. Quite a bit for a rebuild kit, and then I looked up how much just a new carburetor would be, and that was like right around $900. I don't want to spend $900 on a carburetor. That is almost as much as I paid for this whole thing. So looking for different options. So I did some research. I found out you can replace these carburetors with a generic motorcycle carburetor. You just have to order a kit that will bolt on to the existing spots and basically just bolt it up, put the new carburetor on, put new gas lines and everything in there, and it should work. There is a little bit of repositioning the throttle cables and the gas lines go in different spots. There's not really too many instructions on this whole thing. I just know it's possible to do. So that was my next step in this. This whole kit with the carburetor was like right around $100. So overall, we're gonna be saving a lot of money instead of buying a new carburetor or just a carburetor repair kit. Even if I got the carburetor repair kit, there's no guarantee that's gonna fix the issue. So I think this is the best route, and that's what we're gonna go with. First off, the new carburetor works well. There's a couple sacrifices I had to make. A lot of vacuum lines I can't hook up, and I'm not really sure how to rehook them because I think one actually controls the 4x4. Not too sure yet because I haven't tried it, but I think I have to relocate those somehow and hook them up. There's no instructions on installing this carburetor, so I get to kind of figure it out yourself. A little bit of modifications to the gas lines. The return line is a little bit smaller, so I had to kind of rig it up to the original system. There is a way to reroute the whole return line. I just wanted to hook up to factory and keep it like that. That way I'm not modifying too much stuff in case I want to get an original carburetor and hook it all back up how it's supposed to. This shouldn't be too big of a deal to go back to factory. But we got the whole thing hooked up, started up, and it ran great. A little bit of adjusting to do. Driving this thing's a little tricky. It's definitely an older vehicle, especially with the clutch and stuff, and the brakes kind of suck on it. Got it down my street, got it back up, and then it died at the end of my driveway. Had to tow it back in. Quickly figured out what it was. There's like a gas nozzle thing. I can't remember the name of it, but it controls how much gas comes into it, and that whole thing was actually missing out of the bottom of the carburetor. Ended up taking the old one out. Not too big of a deal to remove that. It's actually a lot quicker than the original one. Swapped everything over that I modified on the new carburetor because I had to do a little bit of modifications to get the throttle cable hooked up. So I swapped all that back over, hooked it all back up. One thing that happened though is the gas inline on the new carburetor actually broke off, so I have it zip tied on there right now. Amazon stuff, you know, it's nice that you can ship it back, but it's so cheap. It works now, and it's starting to drive again, and it works perfectly fine. I drove it up and down the street again, and we haven't had any issues so far. Total price right now, I think I have maybe $1,500 total into it. So I think it still is the cheapest K truck in the world so far, at least on YouTube. Probably someone beat me. It's nice being able to move this thing on its own power now. We can move it around the yard, and I can even put some stuff in the back, make it a little bit more functional. Let me know in the comments what you guys want to see done to this. I did order a few extra things for it. I'm gonna replace the seats in there. I found something that I think will work. End up replacing those, and I also would like to do body work and paint it. Not really too sure, but if you guys have any ideas of what I could do to this, please let me know in the comments below. Anything goes. I'm pretty open to doing whatever to this. I already have a back bumper I want to put on it. I want to put a new front bumper with a winch on it. And if we end up kind of restoring this thing, it will need a new windshield and also a rear gate because I don't have that. So let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below. Let me know if you want to see a full rebuild on this thing. Anything goes. I also have an Instagram. If you guys have one and you want to follow me there, you can. I post behind the scenes of upcoming videos and current projects I'm working on. You can check me out there. Also, if you have any more information on these things, some fun facts, you can email me or message me on Instagram. If you find any parts for this thing, specifically the rear gate, please email me. I'm looking for one. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next build, next episode, next rebuild. Who knows? Thanks.